Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we will discuss 7 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs explained to you in the easiest language possible. The topics are as follows. From your analysis section, which also provide you the much important avenue to practice daily answer writing, in the first topic, we'll try to understand the growing informalization of the workforce in our country and what are the steps which can be taken by the government of India in this regard. Then in the second topic, we'll try to assess in detail the issue of flash flood which is taking place in our country and the several mitigation measures which has been adopted by the government. Then from a simplified section, we'll take up 5 news. We will not only try to simplify the news for you, but also provide you the much important value addition keeping in mind the approaching mains 2025. So stay tuned. The article today highlights the informalization of the workforce in the last 2 decades, which has actually contributed to the significant decline in the manufacturing productivity. The issue which forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the larger theme of industrial policy and the issues related to development. So, by using the data published by Annual Survey of Industries, plant level longitudinal data for the last 2 decades from the year of 1999 to 2022, the editorial today suggests that there has been decline or a negative change in India's formal manufacturing sector, specifically in our employment structure, where it cites the data that the share of the contract labor, the labor who is basically working on a contractual basis for a short-term engagement, that has actually increased in the manufacturing workforce from 20% in 1999 to 40.7% by the year of 2022. Keep this in mind, that this Annual Survey of Industries data is published by the Field Operational Division of the National Statistical Office, and it basically includes the factories which are actually registered under the Factories Act of 1948. So a question might be arising in your mind is that what constitutes this contract labor, also called as gig workers? So for that purpose, we will take up the definition which has been provided to us by the Social Security Code 2020. According to which, a gig worker is someone who actually perform the work and earn from activities which falls outside a traditional employer-employee relationship. These are basically the workers who are actually working in a free market economy, and they are basically holding some kind of temporary positions on contractual basis which they have basically signed with various sectors, and where they are basically indulging for a short-term economic output. If we refer to the Niti Aayog's report, it basically suggests that this gig economy or contractual workforce is actually booming in our country, where this gig economic workforce in our country has actually become the 5th largest flexi workspace in the world. And it is going to provide employment to an estimated 23 million workers by the year of 2030. So let's say if there are 100 people who are entering into the workforce, 56 of them will actually be employed by this gig economy itself. And this will eventually translates to the contribution of around 2% to India's global domestic product by the year of 2030. Also, there are strong arguments that how this gig work actually is going to provide or pave a strong way for the female inclusion in the workforce as well. The first and foremost is that such gig work actually provides flexible work timing. So let's say, for example, in our country, due to the patriarchal norms, it is quite understandable that the whole care work is actually imposed upon the woman. So many of the time they indulge or spend a significant amount of their daytime in such caregiving activities. However, because of the flexible work timing which is being provided by such gig economy work culture, it actually paves a way for the inclusion of the woman in the workforce. For example, let's say a woman can actually earn money as a cab driver, where she can actually drive the cab when her husband is in the office or her children has gone to the school. So in this time period, she can actually utilize it to actually generate some sort of employment and income. In this case, digitalization of economy has actually paved a way as well. So imagine let's say for example a woman influencer who is promoting the skincare products from her home itself and uploading it on social media and generating revenue from that. In this case, several micro entrepreneurship opportunities has emerged as well. Many of them are actually being provided by the platform itself. So you guys can actually recall the Amazon's Karigar initiative or Saheli initiative, where they are basically promoting women-led entrepreneurship. Also, there exists a huge possibility of skilling such women through the use of artificial intelligence and Internet of Things. And because of this, if we refer to the total gig workforce, 28% of them are actually women. So this is a kind of a snapshot on the complete gig workforce in our country. Just look at the growth in workforce who are joining such gig economy compared to the previous month. The data belongs to the December 2024. So that is 15.3% increase. Growth in workforce joining gig economy in the one quarter of 2024 was around 50%. The number of tasks allocated monthly on the platform range up to 3,000, and such gig work has actually led to increase in employment in specifically tier 2 and tier 3 cities like, for example, Pondicherry, Mirzapur, Patna, Jabalpur, Kanpur, etc. Then look at the most demanded job profiles in the gig segment, being business development executive, field sale executive, digital promoters, brand promoters, micro influencers, which we were discussing upon. At the same time, if we refer to this gig workforce, a large section of it actually forms the demographic dividend of our country, where 80% of the workforce in the gig economy actually belongs to the age of 20 to 40 years. The idea is that the editorial today suggests that how these gig workers are actually facing a lot of problems when it comes to the workforce in which they are part of and the informal nature of it. The idea is that why such companies actually go for such contract based work, so that first of all they can actually kind of inculcate skilled work at a short demand, and at the same time they can enhance the operational flexibility as well. But the editorial suggests otherwise. It suggests that how the companies are actually indulging more and more in such contractual employment or gig economy. The reason for that is cutting off the input cost or cost avoidance. So for example, the article today suggests that how the wage payment, if we talk for the, let's say for example, a gig worker in comparison to a regular worker, it was actually 14.47% lower. And there existed a huge unfavorable wage differential. So let's say for example, there is a service provider on contract basis working for a big company like Google, versus there is a regular salaried employee who is working for Google and who has access to various kind of social security benefits which are provided by the Google as a company. If we compare both of these people, this contract based worker or gig worker is actually earning 31% less salary than this regular salaried employee in large enterprises like Google, and 12% less in small enterprises. So the average daily labor cost to employer is actually 24% lower when it comes to gig worker. So it is basically profitable for these large companies to actually hire such contract based employees. Thus, as per a report, let's say for example, there is a gig worker in the country. Annually, the mean income is as low as 18,611 rupees in comparison to a regular salaried employee who is earning between 21,500 to 22,800 rupees. And with this meager income, it is basically obvious that most of such gig workers do not save any money, almost 2/3 of them. 25% of them actually end up saving some kind of money. And even that money is actually saved for a very long period of time, such as for example as an emergency fund or for children's education. So it's basically obvious that the propensity to consume of these people who are actually indulged in this gig economy is actually very low. So they are not basically generating any kind of sufficient demand for the product. And if the demand for the product is not there, it's obvious that the company will not produce. If they will not produce, they will actually lead to large-scale job layoff. And that will basically end up creating a vicious cycle of unemployment altogether. ultimately forcing the people to actually indulge in more and more such contractual jobs. The second problem is the editorial today put a lot of impetus upon how such inclusion of gig economy workers actually act as a detrimental impact on the long-term productivity of the economy. So let's say, for example, first and foremost, most of such gig workers are actually hired through a third-party contractor. And the reason for that is that they are basically out of the kind of ambit of the Industrial Trade Act of 1947, which basically kinds of governs the job layoff or any kind of retrenchments or any kind of, let's say for example, if there is any penalty or any kind of wage hike which will take place, all of that. Does all of these basic requirements of a worker is applied to a contractual worker? The answer is no. Thus, many of the time what happens that there exists a kind of a misalignment of long-term interests between such employers who are employing these people and the contractors who are basically acting as a kind of a way for these workers to reach to these companies. Then when you guys are writing the answer, remember to use keywords. What is a keyword in today's editorial? The keyword is the increased likelihood of worker shirking. What is this concept of worker shirking? The same issue also applies on you people as a UPSC aspirant. So let's say for example, you guys worked really hard for almost a week span. You did small sacrifices. Like for example, you guys actually chose to not watch a particular movie and did not went to theaters to cry there and make reels out of it. So because of all of these small sacrifices which you guys have done, does there exist any kind of short-term return in the week's end? Because the nature of the examination is such that it is actually spanning for almost 2 years. So there is no immediate result for the hard work which you guys are actually doing. And that leads to kind of a classic case of diminishing return, where you actually start becoming deterrent to put any more hard work because there is no such small scale motivation or incentive which is available for you. Same happens with this platform worker as well. So let's say for example, if I am working as a delivery boy, it is obvious that in this process I am not doing any kind of skill accumulation. And if there is no such skill accumulation which is taking place, it's obvious that there is no job prospect, growth prospect which is associated with my job profile. Thus these workers, they start basically kind of avoiding any kind of large scale work or any kind of important duties in the absence of any kind of small scale incentive or motivation. Then what these companies can do? These companies can maybe increase the, let's say for example, the redemption value. And to increase the redemption value, obviously they will demand what? They will basically demand higher effort levels from you. They will say that, okay, let's say for example, your work was X till now. Now you should start working X plus 20. Only then we are going to increase your salary. But if the same X plus 20 work can be availed by the new workforce, then why they are actually going to increase the salary altogether? The concept of profit maximization. So if we say that in our country there exists a huge unemployment level, it is obvious that for any minute level of job opening, there exists a huge workforce to actually apply for that. So if the same amount of work can be availed by recruiting a new workforce, then obviously I will not make you a salaried employee altogether. I will not invest this higher redemption value. And thus there exists a kind of a instability in the workforce due to the high labor turnover which is prevailing in our country. At the same time, if I can keep on availing such new recruiters who can just come and keep on working for a short period of time, why I will actually invest in the on-job training? Concept of profit maximization again. Thus all of these issues as per the editorial is actually going to act as a dent on the productivity growth in the long run. And it provides a data substantiation for that by stating that how the real net value added per worker is actually 31% lower in the contract labor intensive enterprises. The third major issue is that how these gig workers, they remain completely out of the ambit of any kind of social security cover. So let's say for example, I am a platform worker and I am going to deliver within 30 minutes the hot pizza which you guys have ordered, that too in the scorching heat of May. After doing all of this tremendous laborious work, can I ask for a minimum wage? The answer is nahi. Because these people, they are not covered under the Minimum Wages Act of 1948. And let's say, for example, while delivering this pizza to you, I was driving recklessly to achieve the target on the time, obviously for the company or for the platform, and I ended up meeting with an accident. Will I get any kind of compensation from the platform for which I was working? The answer is nahi again. Why? Because these platform or contractual workers are not covered under the Occupational Safety Code of 2020 as well. Then imagine that, okay, maybe I'm a nice person. You guys don't have to imagine I am a nice person. So the idea is that my co-workers, they actually go and they say that, okay, we are going on hartal. We will do a protest under Article 19 of the Constitution. We want, kind of rights for our co-worker, as it was happening in the case of the Blinkit workers who went on protest to actually ask for higher wages. Can they actually do that? Do they have the power to form a trade union and actually demand for higher rights? Does there exist the concept of collective bargaining for such contractual worker? The answer is again nahi. Why? Because they are not covered under the provisions of Trade Union Act of 1926 and the Industrial Relations Code of 2020. Then, even though the definition of gig worker is actually provided by the Social Security Code 2020, and you guys saw how ambiguous it is, it also does not provide any kind of institutional security cover to these contractual workers. So let's say, for example, you are a woman employee working for any kind of formal establishment, formal company like Google. Then under the Maternity Benefit Act of 1961, you will actually end up getting 26-week paid leave for your entire maternity period at whatever time period you want to avail. But if you are, let's say, for example, a gig worker who was driving a cab, right, when the husband has gone to the office and the children has gone to the school, will you get any such maternity benefit by the institution or the platform for which you are working? The answer is again nahi. And thus, as per the Fair Work Report 2022, all of these absence of social security cover basically translates that these platform workers are actually 33% of them are working more than 14 hours a day. 34% of these workers are actually earning a meager income of less than 10,000 rupees a month, and 60% of them actually belongs to the marginalized section of the society, like for example scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. Then there are certain specific challenges which are being faced by the women. Like for example, the economic restrictions which are imposed upon them due to the financial dependence which they have on their male counterpart. So let's say, for example, there is a person who actually has a good skill to promote traditional handicraft on social media. And for that purpose, let's say, for example, she basically needs a smartphone, a good internet connectivity. But in rural areas, many of the times, such skilled women are actually dependent on such minute decision level making on their male counterparts because they are financially dependent upon them. Then if we refer to the Global Gender Gap Report of 2025, how there exists a huge wage gap for the same jobs which is being performed by the women and men, where women actually end up earning 20 to 30% less for the same work which they are performing. And such male stereotype or social taboos also act as a kind of a glass ceiling effect, where even for their good work, they are not promoted to the higher decision level making post. Also, we saw that how they basically contribute to 28% of the total gig workforce. So they have a limited bargaining power as well. And then this whole concept of flexible work culture actually acts as a kind of a trap upon them, where let's say, for example, there is no such defined work hours. So actually they end up working overwork, for which they do not get any kind of extra payment as well. At the same time, there are a lot of stressed work conditions. Also, it acts as a kind of a safety concerns for a lot of women. And then such gender stereotypes of having pink jobs, the jobs which are actually kind of more suitable for women. So for example, if let's say, for example, you are running a cab platform where you are providing cab to the people like Ola, and you have, let's say for example, 5 candidates to actually hire. Among those 5 candidates, there are 1 man and 4 women candidates. Even though these 4 women candidates are much better driver and skilled than these men, the gender stereotype which actually prevails and is most of the time laughed upon, that how these women cannot be a good driver, which is actually reflected in a lot of ads and TVs, will actually end up driving this employer to actually kind of provide employment to this male, and that is the concept of pink job. And if we refer to the World Bank's time use survey, it actually reflects that how women end up providing 7 times more care work in comparison to men, and thus they do not have the time to actually skill themselves, which leads to the issue of time poverty altogether. Even though the share of self-employment among the women is actually increasing, you can see that this is also basically leading to the informalization of workforce itself. Thus, what are the steps which can be taken? The editorial first and foremost suggests that we should try to put impetus upon the formalization of the workforce, for which it suggests that in 2016 the government had basically launched a Pradhan Mantri Rozgar Protsahan Yojana to actually incentivize the jobs in the formal sector, where the government was saying that 12% of the employer's contribution under the Employees Provident Fund will actually now be provided by the government. However, maybe because of the huge cost on fiscal deficit, the government actually discontinued this scheme in the year of 2022. The editorial today suggests that we should actually revert it back to lead to the formalization of the workforce. Then we should, for that purpose, we can also provide longer fixed term contracts by concessions in the social security contributions altogether. Then Rajasthan, which has actually passed very recently a Gig Workers Act 2023. So that act has actually established a kind of a welfare board model, where there will be, let's say, representative of such contractual employees, the employer. Then there will be a kind of a third neutral party administrator who will actually ensure that the rights of such contractual workers are actually being safeguarded. For further such formalization, we can actually promote registration of such gig workers on e-Shram platform. So at least we can provide them life and accidental insurance coverage, or make them cover under the Ayushman Bharat scheme, which the government had recently promised. Also, we need to fix the accountability of the aggregators. Like for example, at least 1 to 2% of their revenue, it shall be directed for the welfare of these gig workers on the lines of the corporate social responsibility. Similarly, at least there shall be a provision that there will be a 14-day notice period which will be served to the employee by the employer, and that should also kind of contain the valid reasons that why we are basically laying you off from the job. Ultimately, there shall be revising the revising of the definition of the gig and the platform workers definition itself to make it more formal, and that will actually act as a kind of a guiding light for the various states to create such laws. For example, you should remember that labor as a subject lies in the concurrent list. So basically, the central and the state government both have authority to create the laws, and thus the Social Security Code of 2020 only act as a kind of a guiding path for the state where they can make their own laws. So there shall be a more central interjunction in this particular aspect. Try to attempt this particular question. If possible, comment your answer in the comment box and we move forward to the next news, where the article highlights that how with the increasing global warming and inadequate water management system, the flash floods are actually becoming a major headache for our country. And this issue forms an important component of your GS3 paper, is specifically under the theme of disaster management. So let's say, for example, a question arrives on flash flood. Many of the time it has been found that the students are actually finding it quite difficult to form an introduction. The idea is that there can be various kind of introduction. In the case of flash flood, if we have a ready-made definition, so for example, as per the USA's National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, NOAA, it basically categorizes that flash flood is a rapid rise of water along a stream or in any particular low-lying urban area. And then we can substantiate such definition by various kind of data to actually kind of establish the seriousness of the issue. For example, as per the Ministry of Jal Shakti, 100 plus deaths and 300 crore rupees loss was actually kind of registered in Himachal Pradesh in July 2025 itself because of the various events of flash flood across the state. Or for example, as per the Ministry of Jal Shakti, India is the worst flood affected country in the world after Bangladesh. Or how it has basically contributed to $12 billion of GDP loss in the year of 2024 itself. And because of this increasing events of global warming, there has been 184 flash events which were registered in 2022 across the country, which was actually 14% higher than from the year of 2018. So you guys might be coming across various such headlines, for example, dozens missing after flash flood and landslide in Himachal Pradesh. Remember that in your introduction, integration of current affair actually plays a pivotal role in intriguing the interest of the examiner. Then the second aspect of discussion can be that what are the driving factors for the flash floods in India. So today's explained article provides several reasons for that. The first and foremost is the climatic factors. And it suggests that how it is basically the folly of the monsoon which translates to flash floods in our country. Where it suggests that as a subtropical country, our country, which is basically kind of addressed by the southwest monsoon, which starts or enters from the state of Kerala, 75% of the total rainfall which our country witnesses in an year, it is 75% of that is actually concentrated in the short monsoon months of 4 months from June, July, August and September. Thus, even though, let's say for example, if we have a very sound drainage system, it is actually put under the extreme pressure in a very short span of time, which basically kinds of overwhelms the whole drainage system altogether, leading to the clogging of these drains and ultimately overflowing of the water. And let's say for example, in the absence of any kind of nearby small blue spaces or huge concretization, which is also a phenomenon associated with urbanization, it actually leads to flash floods. So as per the data, 75% of the flash flood events between the year of 1980 to 2020, they were actually witnessed during the monsoon period. And this short-term monsoon rainfall is actually further exacerbated by the events of global warming. So for example, there has been increase in the extreme weather events such as for example cloudburst and mass precipitation which has been witnessed in the recent years. The reason for that is that with every 1 degree Celsius rise in the temperature, the atmospheric capacity to retain the moisture increases by 7%. So more evaporation can take place, more condensation, more formation of dark clouds, huge clouds. If the kind of the capacity of these clouds to retain the water, now that can be compromised much easier, leading to cloudburst and thus huge rainfalls or extreme rainfall events, which has actually increased by 56% in the last 4 decades. Remember that as per the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change 6th assessment report, the global temperature has already increased 1.4 degrees Celsius from the pre-industrial level. So it's obvious that the moisture holding capacity of the atmosphere has also increased significantly between 7 to 10%. However, the explained article itself provides a counter argument which has been given by IIT Gandhinagar, where it says that only 25% of such flash flood events is actually directly caused by extreme precipitation, where they suggest that rather the condition of soil actually plays a more important role. So let's say for example, this is soil, and soil has a huge natural absorption capacity for moisture, for any kind of water or precipitation altogether. But what is happening that let's say for example, if there are series of small scale multi-days low intensity rainfall for a very long period of time, then this upper soil layer is already quite saturated and thus they cannot absorb any water or any precipitation anymore, and that leads to kind of a concept of flash runoff. Because of this flash runoff, it is basically translating into various kind of flash floods. The second factor is the combination of various geophysical phenomena. So the explained article basically suggests that how in the west coast and central India, it is not only this huge precipitation or cloud burst or extreme weather events, rather it is a combination of various factors. So let's say for example, this is a large river basin and there are such small sub basins which are basically connected with this river. So let's say for example, the cloud burst has taken place here and there is a huge water supply in this river altogether. The article suggests a keyword, and that is the flashiness of the sub-river basin, where the regions along this sub-river basin, let's say for example, if they have become highly populated, so there is a lot of encroachment of the coast of the rivers altogether, the banks of the rivers. Lot of sand is being actually taken away from them, the illegal sand mining which takes place. So there is basically a kind of a poor basin management in various such sub-basin areas, as well as poor waste management. So a lot of waste is also being dumped in these rivers, and thus the bank of the rivers, or the base of the river, it keeps on increasing, keeps on accumulating. So the total water holding capacity of a particular area of a sub-river basin, that is actually declining because of the poor tilting of the soil base altogether. Then these sub-river basins, they were basically connected to the kind of a network of wetlands, lakes, ponds or blue space area. But again, because of the huge anthropogenic factor to actually create these huge buildings and highways and dams, etc., all of these natural blue spaces, specifically in the urban cities, they have declined. So this drainage connection has been completely de-established. So now if there is any such inflow of the water in the larger river basin, the water level actually quickly reach to the peak level after heavy rainfall event even in these sub-basins, leading to this concept of flash floods specifically in the urban areas. Then let's take an example of a mountain area. So let's say here there is a high relief, and from here there is a river which is basically coming, and here a dam we have created, a natural dam, gravity based dam. Now there took place a cloud burst or huge glacial melt because of the rising temperature in this region altogether. So water is basically coming from high relief and there is a steep slope. So there is a huge high intensity of water flow. And thus this dam, when it is unable to bear the pressure, it ends up releasing a huge amount of water flow in the downstream area, where again exists what? The poor capacity of sub-basin. And thus this high discharge of water quickly leads to the overflow of water. To understand this better, we'll take up a case study of Sikkim in Assam, repeatedly in the news because of the flash flood which is taking place there, also inundating the region of Kaziranga National Park, which we are going to study today. So in Sikkim river, in the region of Sikkim, the major river is Brahmaputra. The Brahmaputra river basically originates from the Cheomyung-dung glacier near the Mansarovar mountains, which are in the Tibetan plateau. Now, as per the Indian Meteorological Department, this Tibetan plateau has warmed up to 0.42 degrees Celsius per decade. The temperature is rising. Remember, with every 1 degree Celsius rise, 7% more moisture holding capacity. So again, there can be huge precipitation as well as heavy snow melting which is taking place. So there is drastic increase in the water flow, again coming from a very steep region, high relief. So because of the huge intensity of water flow which takes place, there takes place heavy sediment accumulation as well, when it is cutting the mountain ranges, creating those gorges and all. And when it reaches from this mountain region to the plain region, there exists a decline of slope, a huge decline of slope. And that is, let's say for example, the slope here was around 2.8 meter per kilometer. By the time it reaches to the plain, the Tarai region, it gets to 0.1 meter per kilometer. So now all the sediment which this river was bringing, that too with heavy flow, now that is deposited in the lower bank of the river. So thus basically the lower bank starts getting accumulated. So there is a very less water retaining capacity of the river now. What it will start doing? It will start basically eroding the banks altogether. And thus the width of these banks of Brahmaputra river has actually increased by 15 km per decade in the region of Sikkim. So let's say for example, earlier the areas which were actually far away from the river bank, those urban cities, now the river is basically reaching to them. Again, a lot of anthropogenic factors play its role as well. If the question is asked in mains examination, remember to cite all of this data as a case study. So in Assam itself, in the region of Sikkim, there is a huge population boom. By the year of 1940, there were 30 people living in the per kilometer square area. But now the population density has increased to 398 people per kilometer square. Then obviously the huge encroachment of such river banks for sand mining obviously, and the construction which is taking place in floodplain to actually sustain the population. The various development activities also kind of act as a pivotal role. Creation of highway and railway lines parallel to the floodplains of the Brahmaputra, as well as deforestation and the destruction of the wetlands which has taken place. So remember that when we are growing these trees, the trees have these long roots where they have this huge capacity to actually kind of hold the soil. The more number of soil in a particular area which is held by the tree, it also acts as a kind of a water storage, small water storage reservoirs. So when we are basically concretizing all of these areas, we are also basically leading to the decline of such small water reservoirs. And that has led to a huge impact of flood not only in Assam, but if we refer to the National Flood Commission, 40 million hectares of our country's land is actually prone or vulnerable to the flood effect, and 18.6 million hectares of cultivable land where we actually grow crops, they are also affected annually. Thus, these flash floods act as a huge cause of concern for our food security as well. Just look that in the last 1 month in Himachal Pradesh, there has been huge loss of livelihood and huge loss of GDP and capital infrastructure as well. Specifically in Assam, 40% region is prone to flood. 50% of Sikkim's cultivable area has been lost to flood since 1954. There has been taken place huge damage to life and property. And don't you think if all of this is taking place, the people in these areas, they will actually start migrating away from these areas. So where they will go? They will actually go to the safe urbanized cities because they are kind of expecting that there will be better infrastructure to tackle with such issue. Don't you think such outward migration from such flood affected areas will further enhance the issue of urban agglomeration? The huge loss to GDP which takes place for the Assam's economy every year, and obviously the negative impact on biodiversity. For example, in many of the recent years and the cases, it has been observed that the inundation of the Kaziranga National Park by the Brahmaputra river has also led to the loss of life of the one-horned rhinos. Thus, there are several steps, short-term and long-term mitigation strategies which has been adopted by the government. First and foremost is creation of emergency action plans in the dam, creation of a strong early warning system, local community-based early warning system by Indian Meteorological Department and National Disaster Management Authority to actually provide for a safe evacuation plans in the case of emergencies by the National Disaster Response Force and SDRF, State Disaster Response Force. Also the creation of shelter camps and distribution centers by various district magistrates. And the flood insurance which has also been covered or as one of the major component of the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. In long-term strategies, first and foremost, we can actually take up the interlinking of the river programs, such as for example, Ken-Betwa interlinking program. So let's say for example, if there is a huge inundation which is taking place in a large river, the kind of a huge chunk of water from that can actually be diverted to the small rivers, or for example, in the rivers of the region where there is a kind of a drought which is taking place. Then to create natural, let's say for example, preventing methods, the government is actually putting more impetus on creating mangroves altogether under the MISTI initiative. Such creation of natural buffers under floodplain zoning is also taking place, where let's say for example, this is a flood prone area. So in the very high flood risk zone, there are open spaces and agriculture recreation. Then flood resistance, residential and industrial sector comes kind of behind that. Critical infrastructure has been kept in a very low flood risk. Then we can also adopt urban afforestation method, like for example Miyawaki method, to create blue and green spaces. And adopting the China model, we can actually aim for the kind of the sensitization program to actually create flood awareness among the larger population, how to act in such situation, how to help in evacuation, even help in community-based early warning systems. So remember all of these suggestions, try to create an answer for this, and we move forward to the next news, where we are going to analyze the important challenges which persist in India-US trade deal which has been under the negotiation. What is the context of the news? So with just 2 days left for the August 1 deadline, which was actually set by the Donald Trump administration to wrap up agreements with its trading partners like India, the idea is that the US Department of Commerce is actually envisaging a tariff rate of somewhere between 15 to 20% range for the rest of the world. And that basically means a significant increase on the 10% baseline tariff which was still being applied on the trading partners now. So, USA, which is the world's oldest democracy, formed through the adoption of the constitution in the year of 1786 in the Philadelphia Congress, and India, which is the world's largest democracy with a population of 1.4 billion people, both of these countries' relations have strategically evolved over the course of years on the basis of 3 important pillars. The first is the shared democratic values which we have. The second is the kind of the net security provider role India plays in the Indo-Pacific region, where almost 60% of global trade actually traverses across. And the third is obviously the important impetus on the bilateral trade relationship. And thus, to further put impetus upon that, both the countries have actually been under the negotiation to sign a bilateral trade agreement in the year of 2025 itself, with an ambition to actually double our total bilateral trade with USA to $500 billion by 2030. Where India already showcased various positive steps in the budget 2025, where we actually reduced the tariff for various US products, such as, for example, the automobiles like Harley-Davidson bikes, or for example for various medical devices. So there are several positive steps which has been taken by India in this regard, considering we actually share a very important positive balance of trade in goods with USA. For example, look at the data here, that how we enjoys a trade surplus. So as of August 2024, India was exporting $54.7 billion worth of goods to USA compared to only $28 billion of import, and thus our positive balance of trade was amounting to around $26 billion. Remember that USA actually accounts for 18% of our country's total exports. So it is a very important export destination for us, and how our export has significantly increased from the year of 2013 as per the Ministry of Commerce. The various important products which we actually export to the US economy, such as, for example, pearls, semi-precious stones, electrical machinery and equipments, pharmaceutical products, mineral fuels, bituminous substances, etc. And the major source of imports are mineral fuels, pearls, nuclear reactors, or for example air spacecraft, etc. So what are the major challenges as per the today's article? The first major challenge is that how USA is actually putting a lot of pressure on India to raise our energy import from USA in 2 dimensions. First is the oil, the crude oil, and the second is LNG. So when it comes to crude oil, if we talk about our top 5 suppliers, the first is Russia, which has risen very recently. Second is Iraq, third is Saudi Arabia, fourth is UAE, and fifth is USA. There is a reason for this. First of all and foremost, the cost of shipping oil from USA to our country is actually $4 per barrel. And if we are actually importing the same crude oil from the region of West Asia, let's say for example from Iraq, Saudi Arabia and UAE, it is actually costing us only $1.5 per barrel. So basically the oil import, crude oil import from USA is actually twice costlier. The third is that there is less compatibility of US crude grade for different petroleum products which we actually do. And if you are, let's say for example, we will start importing more oil from USA, don't you think that act as a kind of an antithesis to the India's Panchamrit target, where we are basically saying that by the year of 2030, 50% of our total energy demand will actually be substantiated by green energy. Thus, in comparison to the crude oil, we can actually source good amount of oil from the LNG section. In top 5 LNG supplier, Qatar is the first, USA is actually second there, UAE is third. Here, why we actually import more LNG from USA? Because there is less role of freight cost here. And also American LNG is actually priced at a significant discount. And if you compare it to the West Asia, the price from USA is actually less when it comes to LNG. So the idea is that we should actually try to put in the trade deal that we are not going to import that much of a crude oil, but we can actually kind of substitute that with a good import of LNG. Then there are certain US demands, such as, for example, Trump is pushing hard for zero duty access to Indian market like how he did in Vietnam and Indonesia. He is also putting pressure on us that India shall commit to specific purchases and investments like European Union and Japan. Then he is also trying to integrate a kind of a transshipment clause where they are actually offering additional 20% tariffs to Vietnam. Vietnam is a small country. Trump was able to put kind of pressurize them in this accepting these demands. Also to put extra tariff on BRICS and on landromat countries. So for example, basically Trump is saying that all the countries who are purchasing significantly from Russia, now I am going to put a lot of more tariff on such countries. So the landromat countries are those countries who act as a kind of an ally to the Europe and USA but end up buying oil from Russia. India is also alleged to be one of them. Remember, it is not our kind of official stand. So what has been our response? We are basically trying to ensure that the headline tariff does not exceed 15% for its good export. We are open to purchasing 3 important things: defense equipment, natural gas import, LNG and nuclear reactors. We are also basically putting impetus upon keeping our agriculture and dairy sector off the table and push for market access in labor intensive sectors. And ultimately, we are saying that we are going to open our market access to your automobile and consumer durables, but only in quota system. So we will not completely open up our market for your products so that you can flood our products, and that can actually dent the idea of Make in India. Rather, we are going to do it over multiple years course. Thus, there are several persisting challenges. First and foremost is, you guys can recall, the Indo-Pacific Economic Forum for Prosperity, a kind of a US initiative where 14 countries joined, including our country, to actually adopt China plus one strategy. That basically involved to actually streamline the logistics supply chain for critical minerals to actually reduce the dependency of these countries on China. But even in this IPC, our country did not join the 4th or the trade pillar. And the reason for that was that even though the USA government was actually kind of asking the Indian government to reduce the tariff, but they were not reducing the tariff on our Indian product. Similarly, you guys can recall that how before the arrival of the Trump, India actually used to enjoy a generalized system of preferences, which is a kind of a system under the World Trade Organization, where a developing nation like India can actually trade with developed nation like USA, and for our products there was less import duty which was charged. But now this generalized system of preferences has been removed as well. And the major reason for that is that there exists a huge issue of unemployment and fiscal deficit in USA. Where in USA the unemployment rate is at 4%, is at historical high, and at the same time there exists a huge fiscal deficit of around $1.3 trillion. So that basically means that the USA's economy is hugely indebted. So basically US is also trying to reduce their fiscal deficit, and thus they are saying that we are not going to invest on capital expenditure anymore, which was we were doing so immensely till now to actually create the jobs. We are not going to do that. So now if we want the private sectors to take the charge and create more employment, obviously Trump is focusing upon Make America Great Again, and a great part of that was Atmanirbhar USA as well. So basically to put more tariffs on foreign products like Indian products which are flooding USA's market, because as you guys can see, USA has a huge trade deficit with India. Just look at the USA's trade deficit with other countries like China, Mexico and Vietnam. So now you can relate that why such huge import tariffs were actually being put on Vietnam altogether. Then even there has been kind of allegations on IPR violation or intellectual property rights violation on India, where India has been put under the USTR 301 report. So, the Global Trade Research Institutes and Analysis says that because of the trade protectionist policy which is being adopted by USA currently, India will not be able to have certain beneficial trade outcomes from this deal, and thus India should not kind of counter down its approach to the pressure of the Trump and make sure that our agriculture sector, specifically our automobile and the sunrise sectors, are not impacted by these trade deals. So remember these points and we move forward to the next news, where we are going to actually read a very interesting article which actually showcases that how, even though as per the arguments by the World Bank that the income inequality has declined in our country, there are a lot of other prevailing inequality in our economy. So first of all, what is the context of the news? The article suggests that the Gini index which basically kind of ranks the country on the basis of the income inequality which persists. The Gini index ranked India among the world's most equal societies, the fourth most equal society, by giving the country a score of 25.5, thus placing India in a moderately low inequality category. However, the article suggests that the lived reality in India actually paints a much different picture. So for example, what were the flaws in the conducting of the kind of the World Bank's report which actually kind of labeled our country as the world's fourth most equal country? The idea was that in our country the poverty is not calculated on the basis of income, rather as per the Tendulkar committee it is actually calculated on the basis of consumption expenditure. So, as per the household consumption expenditure, it was actually based upon a kind of a modified mixed reference period, where we basically take the kind of the expenditure which is being done on the different kind of products, and for them different reference periods are taken. So, for example, let's say if you are talking about the consumption expenditure on food, we will take up 7 days for perishable items like fruits. Or if you are talking about the consumption expenditure on services like education, then the reference period will be around 1 year. So, as per the data, between 2011 to 22, there was a decline in the consumption equality, where the consumption-based Gini coefficient actually declined from 28.8 to 25.5. The same report also highlighted that how in our country the consumption basket has actually become much more healthier. For example, in rural areas, there were around 63% people who were actually spending to buy fresh fruits in the year of 2011, and that increased to 90% by the year of 2022. Similarly, the report also said that the income inequality has also declined in our country, and it can be showcased that if you look at the kind of the international poverty line which is fixed at $3 per day by the World Bank, even if we calculate that, India actually lifted out 27 crore people out of poverty between the same time period. However, the article today suggests that there exist various other kinds of inequality, the first being the wealth inequality. So it basically gives an example that you guys can imagine the different kind of lifestyle of a person who is actually able to afford a 30 lakh rupees car, and the driver which he has employed to drive that car, who is getting a meager salary of 3 lakh rupees per annum. And this is exactly what has been highlighted in the World Inequality Lab report of 2024, where it says that after the British Raj, now in our country there is a rise in billionaire Raj, where 1% of our population actually holds 22% of the national income. And thus, it also suggests that how this consumption expenditure which we are talking about, that is basically based upon the inflation value as well. So if you are saying that the consumption expenditure has increased, one significant reason for that can be that the inflation of the prices of goods and services has increased as well. Then the article today suggests that there are actually challenges which exist to assess the real picture of poverty. Why? Informal employment, which we were discussing about, or for example the low income levels of people and high threshold for the non-taxable income. So there is a huge population which does not actually file the taxes. So how we can actually calculate? There is no official data as such for that, because all the data which we calculate is actually based upon the taxable income. So the article suggests that there exists a huge income inequality, and just look here that how the pre-tax national income for top 1% was around 22.6%, and for the top 10% it was around 57.7, more than half actually. The second form of inequality on which it puts impetus upon is gender inequality, which is another fundamental form, where it says that how women who have been historically marginalized from the workforce, they actually comprise only 36% of the worker population ratio. However, remember, as per the global gender gap report of 2025, the female labor force participation rate in our country exists at 45%. Then it suggests that if we look at the glass ceiling effect which we are discussing upon, the number in senior and middle management level, where women actually account for only 12.7% leadership role. Even though India has the third largest startup ecosystem in the world, women run startups in the country are only 7.5%. So this global gender gap report, which was actually released on these 4 parameters, actually showcase that how India has been able to only close 40% of its gender gap. And even though educational attainment has been 97%, gender gap has been closed in this direction, the female representation in the parliament has actually declined in 2025, and their share in ministerial role has declined to 5.6% in 2025. Then it suggests the third kind of inequality, and that is the digital divide. A very important data where it showcases that how 52% of the schools have functional computers, only 54% of schools have internet accessibility. There exists only 41% of the rural population which is actually using the smartphones. Now imagine about those 48% of the schools which does not have functional computers in our country. How they will be trained in artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data analytics. So do you think that they will be skillful or compatible enough to actually compete with their, let's say for example, digitally advanced counterparts who are living in the urban areas and are using ChatGPT? Don't you think that they will become actually unfit over a period of time for Industry 5.0, thus leading to the issue of industry required skill offered mismatch, and thus will remain in the lower income quintile, thus being the part of the vicious cycle of poverty? So to deal with all of these issues, there has been certain steps which has been taken by the government of India, specifically under the Article 39 of the Constitution, which actually act as a directive principle to the state to actually reduce down the income inequality and the status of opportunity and wealth. So the government has actually brought employment linked incentive scheme in the budget 2024. The government is focusing upon the skilling of the workforce under the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana. There is a provision for vocational training in the National Education Policy 2020. And to actually ensure a healthcare, let's say for example, under the insurance of Ayushman Bharat, and providing subsidized food under National Food Security Act 2013, the government is basically trying to put a human capital framework foundation on which skilling, education can be achieved by the people to actually jump from the lower income quintile. That is the idea, and we move forward to the next news, where we are going to read about a new satellite which has been in the news, and it is not any ordinary satellite. Let's try to understand what is NISAR. So what is the context of the news? NISAR, or NASA-ISRO Synthetic Aperture Radar, which has been jointly by ISRO and the US National Aeronautics and Space Administration, has actually been in the development for a decade, where the kind of the signing of the instrument was done in the back of year 2014. The total cost is actually more than $1 billion, thus making it the most expensive satellite ever built. And it is also the first satellite which is actually equipped with 2 kinds of synthetic aperture radar, about which we are going to read further, which will operate in different frequency bands, and thus making it the most powerful Earth observation satellite ever. So there are a lot of firsts, remember them. Now certain features of NISAR. So it is going to be launched on GSLV Mark II, and it is going to be launched in a kind of a sun synchronous orbit. So that basically means that there will be a large coverage area, and this satellite is actually going to reach to the same place from where it started orbiting in the span of 12 days. It is going to be launched from Satish Dhawan Space Center at Sriharikota, in the Tirupati district of Andhra Pradesh, where it is actually going to have wide range of observation from melting of glaciers to the volcanic eruptions to the seismic activity or the calculation of earthquake as well. And it is going to be in a mission mode from the year of 2025 to 2028. And all the data which is being observed by NISAR, it is going to be freely available for all the observatories across the world in the span of, let's say, 10 to 12 days. And if there is a case of natural disaster, then the data will be provided within 24 to 48 hours. Now, why NISAR is first of its kind? First and foremost, the radar antenna reflector is actually with a diameter of just 12 meters. The antenna can produce images whose resolution is comparable to those taken by the ground-based antenna with 20 kilometer diameter. Then it is deployed solar array, which will actually generate electric power, and that will be used to run instruments such as, for example, the two important synthetic aperture radars or SARs which we have. What is a synthetic aperture radar? So let's say, for example, it is a kind of an imaging radar which actually sends signal in the non-visible spectrum of the electromagnetic waves, like for example microwaves or radio waves. And when the radiated pulse is actually returned as a kind of a signal, it actually calculates on the basis of the distance, the velocity of the signal, the composition as well as the texture of the swath width altogether. Remember, it can see an object A all the time as it travels from 1 to 2. The data can be processed as if the distance from 1 to 2 was the aperture of a huge radar altogether. So there are two radars. First is L-band. L-band can actually penetrate through tree cover, ice and sand to actually map the ground below by using higher wavelength microwaves. So don't you think it will be very useful to actually, kind of assess the minerals which we have, to actually assess the lithium reserves in a particular state and district which we have found? Can anybody name that? Second is S-band SAR, which actually use shorter wavelength. So it cannot penetrate very deep into the ground, but it can actually capture features as, for example, crop fields and water bodies. The significance of NISAR is that there is a huge possibility of collaboration for further such high value and long gestation project. There is a kind of a technology transfer linkage which we have established with NASA now. For example, NASA provided for this mission the L-band synthetic aperture radar, 12-meter antenna as well as the GPS control. Then we are actually going to assess important information which will actually help us to tackle the climate change as well as natural disasters like earthquake and volcanic eruption. And ultimately, it will actually kind of bring NASA and India much more closer for strategic partnership for space, like how India has actually signed the Artemis Accord. On the basis of this, just try to apply the application of this synthetic aperture radar in this particular question, and let's see if you guys can guess the answer correct. We move forward to the next news, where we are going to read about a very important tiger related data which has actually featured in the news on the Global Tiger Day, which was actually celebrated yesterday on 29th of July. According to which, the Kaziranga Tiger Reserve in Assam has actually recorded the third highest tiger density in India after Bandipur Tiger Reserve in Karnataka and the Corbett National Park in Uttarakhand. So if we refer to the tiger census which was conducted before, according to it, the estimated tiger population was around 3,925 with a surety of 3,682 tigers. The state with the highest tiger numbers were Madhya Pradesh, Karnataka, followed by Uttarakhand, Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu. The state having the lowest tiger numbers, Nagaland with 0, Mizoram with 0, Jharkhand, Goa and Arunachal Pradesh with a very minute population of 1, 5 and 9 respectively. So when it comes to the reserve with the highest tiger population, pay attention. There was Jim Corbett with the highest. Second was your Bandipur in Karnataka and the third was your Nagar Hole. The Kaziranga earlier was at the 7th position, but now the Kaziranga has actually jumped to the third highest tiger density in our country. So to actually conserve this declining tiger population, there was a Project Tiger which was launched in the year of 1973. And when we calculated in the year of 1972 using the pug mark method, the estimated tiger population was around 1,827. Then M Stripes, a kind of a monitoring of tiger, a new method was adopted by the forest department, which was also asked in your prelims examination one year. With that, the actually estimated population increased to 3,682. So under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, there was creation of critical tiger habitats. However, there lies a leukma that with the amendment of Wildlife Protection Act of 2006, it did not prohibit the diversion of such tiger protected areas for the development project. The tiger, which is still listed as endangered under the International Union for Conservation of Nature and in the Appendix 1 of CITES. Thus, it is actually granted the highest level of protection under Schedule 1 in the Wildlife Protection Act of 2023 as well. To actually implement the Project Tiger, there is a particular authority called as National Tiger Conservation Authority, which is a statutory body created under the amendment of Wildlife Protection Act of 2006, which is actually chaired by the Minister of Environment and the Forest. Remember all of this factual information for your prelims examination, and we move forward to the last news of the day, where we are going to actually read about Kaziranga National Park. So it has already featured 2 times today, and it also forms an integral part of another explained article, where the article actually starts with the Man Ki Baat of our Honorable Prime Minister, where he mentioned that how the first ever grassland bird census has actually been conducted in Assam's Kaziranga National Park. Remember this fact. So this census exercise was actually a survey which was conducted for a week to record the grassland bird population in Kaziranga, where there is a particular doctoral student who was actually studying the black-breasted parrotbill, a threatened grassland bird, and he had received a kind of a scholarship under the Inspire Fellowship program, which actually belongs to the Ministry of Science and Technology, where he actually kind of took the help of other scientists to count all the grassland bird species in the park, 70% of which is actually covered by the grassland, where they actually found small, well camouflage birds that are not easily spotted. Thus, they actually prioritize over 10 species of bird which are either globally threatened or endemic to the Brahmaputra floodplains. Note them down. For example, Bengal florican, swamp francolin, Finn's weaver, swamp grass babbler, Jadon's babbler. Then there is a slender-billed babbler, the black-breasted parrotbill, marsh babbler, as well as the Indian grass bird. A small few facts about the Kaziranga National Park, which is on the south of the Brahmaputra river, which we are discussing upon, and it is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which is actually very prominent for the fauna, as it contains 2/3 of the world's one-horned rhino, which are listed as vulnerable on IUCN. It also contains the largest population of Asiatic water buffalo, as well as the eastern race of swamp deer. And in the year of 2006, it was declared as Tiger Reserve, and now it contains the 3rd highest tiger density in the country as well. There are 7 national parks which contains in Assam: Dibru-Sakhova, Nameri, Dehingpatkai, Kaziranga, Ramona, Manas, as well as the Orang National Park. And the rhinos, which are the 2nd largest species of rhino after African water rhino, and the 2nd largest land mammal in Asia after the Asian elephant, listed as vulnerable on the IUCN, and 2/3 of the population which is found in Kaziranga. Remember all of these facts, and with this we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation, and thank you.